All right, you Herle Burly-ites, we've got a real treat for you this afternoon. It's a Thursday afternoon, and we're going to have just a fun, relaxed conversation about Canadian politics with two of my favorite observers of Canadian politics, Paul Wells and Shannon Proudfoot. Paul Wells, you may know from this podcast. You may even know him from other places because he writes in other places. He has a Substack now. He used to write for all of the major publications in the country in one form or another. I consider Paul kind of an acquired taste in the sense that I only acquired it after I no longer had a stake in the things that he was writing about. And when he was writing about the things that I was involved in, I didn't like Paul Wells' writing very much. And now I find myself much more attracted to it. And so great to have you here, Paul. Good to see you.
I think that's entirely fair. Hi, David.
Yeah. And Shannon Proudfoot, gets a lot of love over on The Curse of Politics. We like to choose her clippings as things to discuss. She works at the Globe and Mail now. The two of them used to work at Maclean's magazine together when that was a news magazine. But now they are separate. Paul's part of the new independent journalism thing, and Shannon is one of the last bastions of mainstream media, as it is called now, at the Globe and Mail, covering Canadian politics. And let me just start, because when I looked up your bio, Shannon, on the Globe and Mail, it said she's fascinated by not just what happened, but what it looked and felt like. So let's start with, because I want to talk to you about about what's going on in Canadian politics. So let's start with that and the Carney government. What does it look and feel like to you? Because it looks and feels different than the previous government to me by quite a bit.
Oh, hell yeah. I find it bizarro. I understand politically why people, both, people on the other partisan team and people in general, keep talking about how it's the same crew because it's the same front bench, but it feels and functions wildly differently to me. Like the way I keep thinking about it, this is going to be pretty mean, pretty rude, but with the Trudeau crew, you'd ask a mechanical question, like, how is this policy going to work? Or, are you going to be able to solve this problem you say you want to solve, or is it going to create a different problem? And you get an answer about values. We will continue to stand up for this or stand up for that. You couldn't get a straight answer, even if it was a good faith mechanical question. I will say, I think Carney, like one of the knocks or one of the ideas of what was going to be his weakness when he announced to run for the leadership was, a technocrat, kind of a dork who can't talk in normal terms. But for people on my side of the table, that's actually really great because I find he digs talking details. There's certain questions he won't answer. He just won't do it. And sometimes he's pretty brittle about it. But there's actual mechanical answers to mechanical questions. There's also, I find him really interesting to watch him operate because he's also so strategic. Like I wrote a profile of him during the campaign, and when you talk to people who've worked with him, that's what they talk about, that kind of like 3 moves ahead on the chessboard quality to the way he operates. And I find you can really see that. You can see the wheels turning, like say when he was in the Oval Office, you could see what he's saying and not saying. And you can see him doing it, but he's also like pretty good at it. There's some finesse, but you can still see the machinery behind the scenes. So I just find it really, really interesting to watch right now.
Yeah, Paul, what's your take on just the impression of the government and how it looks and feels as opposed to what it's actually doing?
I forget where I was the other day. Someone asked me to grade, I think it was on the Pia Chattopadhyay's Sunday morning show on CBC. And Pia said, what letter grade would you give this new prime minister? Which is a kind of question I despise. Unless I'm ready to give him an F. I sure don't want to be caught on record saying anything nice. And I said, you got to give him something close to an A. I mean, highly skilled people often make the jump into politics. People with great accomplishment in other fields make the jump into politics and get their teeth handed to them all the time. Ken Dryden was a legend in hockey. Mark Garneau was a real astronaut. Peter Pocklington was one of Canada's great business success stories, and they went absolutely nowhere, And yet this guy managed the transition with some finesse. And even though the Liberal campaign in the spring was often flat, he has essentially kind of a functional majority. And he's been getting more and more. I'm morbidly fascinated by the Nanos polls these weeks because he's opened up a 20-point advantage over Pierre Poilievre for preferred prime minister in the prairies. I would not have thought it possible. And and yet he keeps ratcheting the emotional and political stakes up rather than cashing in his chips. And he keeps saying we have to fundamentally rethink the economy. We have to um, uh, make changes such as we haven't seen in my lifetime. You know, and so that kind of emotional brinksmanship is something I haven't seen since Brian Mulroney was the prime minister. And what's that?
Ripping up the free trade agreement. This is
Exactly,
me ripping up the free trade agreement.
And uh, that shit is super risky, you know. And so um, I would have figured him as a newbie for somebody who'd be timid in politics, and he's just consistently the opposite of timid. And for the life of me, I don't know how it ends, but it's fun to watch.
So what's working about it? Because you're right. Almost everybody said he would be terrible when he was about to get into it, right? Everything's wrong with this guy politically. He's going to be bad. He doesn't know how to do politics. So is he somehow, is his style uniquely suited to this time? Or did the people who said he didn't know anything about politics not know anything about politics? Like something's clearly working right now. It may not forever, but he's connecting with people at a level, and it's nothing that you would normally. I mean, because for instance, the talking points didn't come out of nowhere. Talking points came out of years and years of training of, I mean, Paul, you've written about this process. So it's not just that the Trudeau people woke up one morning and said, we won't answer questions. This had been developing, and it had been developing because it was the safe political thing to do.
Yeah.
So why is that different now?
Well, so I'll answer briefly, and then I'll throw to Shannon. But it's funny, the one of the co-founders of Substack wrote this morning, this guy Hamish McKenzie, who's the Australian of the crew, who's a bit more of the political philosopher of the thing, and he says um, the old way is defensive, prepared answers, and the new way is straight answers, even if they're awkward, right? So Donald Trump is the new way, and this guy who just won the Democrat primary in New York is the new way, you know? And by that template, Carney represents more of the new way than a guy like Pierre Poilievre does. But Poilievre, like Trudeau, he goes into any public setting sort of with his Hurt Locker costume on, um, uh, you know, absolutely armed against the possibility that it could go pear-shaped. In that sense, I mean, everyone calls Poilievre Trump-like. Poilievre is the opposite of Trump. Trump does not give a shit who's listening or what he says to them, you know?
Yeah, right.
And I think people find that refreshing. I mean, and also, um, Justin Trudeau made such an ostentatious show of uh, ignoring the economy and telling Canadians that they didn't really care about the economy. That a guy, a sort of a more or less single issue guy whose only thing is the economy, has had the road paved for him by his predecessor's fecklessness.
So, we're still breaking down the incredible $70 billion investment our presenting sponsor TELUS is putting into Canada to help transform our digital landscape. The thing I want to focus on here is how TELUS is championing the breaking down of old, outdated trade barriers to make way for one Canadian market. See, certain big players, think red, think blue, have historically maintained control in different regions of the country, limiting real competition, leaving consumers with few options. TELUS wanted to bring something new to the market. Innovative new product bundles featuring internet, mobility, health, security, smart energy, and ultimately provide more choice and drive better prices for services. So, they recently disrupted long-standing duopolies with their entry into the Ontario and Quebec home internet market, leveraging the CRTC's wholesale wireline regime. Despite being a national wireless provider, they are a new entrant for internet services in Ontario and Quebec, with less than 4% of the market share. We've heard a lot of talk from government about breaking down interprovincial trade barriers, right? It would stand to reason the Fed should want TELUS to represent exactly what Bill C5 is meant to accomplish, strengthening the Canadian economy by making it easier for businesses and consumers to buy Canadian goods and services through the removal of provincial trade barriers. Except, some carriers desperately want to maintain those barriers and prevent TELUS from reselling in the East. They've petitioned Cabinet to keep barriers in place. I'll just say it. The government listening to those competitors and reversing their independent regulator, the CRTC's decision, is counter to the objective of Bill C5 and the goal of one Canadian economy. Those same opponents of wholesale claim the decision will reduce competition and accelerate consolidation. In fact, the policy is designed to enhance competition by facilitating new entrants to the internet market. This increased competition is already resulting in lower prices, especially in Ontario and Quebec. A strong national economy that connects people to what matters most is precisely the thinking TELUS supports. A company that announced $70 billion with a plan to spend it coast to coast in the next 5 years to connect more Canadians and bring more competition through resale to make efficient use of existing networks. More next week. Stan, what do you think about Carney's approach to politics?
I think it's hard to pull out any given strand of it because so many things happen at once. This would have been like the world's shittiest science experiment, right? Because you introduced like
There's
four
no
different
control out of
variables
it.
at
Yeah,
once.
yeah.
Like I actually tried to tease out in like a temporal way what might be going on, like even when we were asking poll questions during the election and stuff like that. And it was more or less simultaneous that Trudeau announced he was leaving. So sort of the antipathy that had been built up somehow kind of followed him out the door way more than I would have expected, to be honest. Carney became front runner. And then Trump started looking at us with like imperial lust in his eyes. So to me, to kind of separate out, like to talk about were people wrong about Carney, were they wrong about politics? Like, why has he turned out to be so far pretty good at this new thing he's trying? It's a bit hard to even isolate that because it reminds me of like, one of those old Looney Tunes cartoons where you'd have like the characters in the foreground and the landscape would slide away behind them and be replaced by like a different landscape, like a desert or something. That's what I feel like has happened. The whole concept, the whole context around him, around us has changed. Like to Paul's point, I think he's right that Carney has a really nice entree to say, hey, guess what? I'm economics guy after 10 years of do not care about economics guy. But also that rose up the kind of like hierarchy of needs of all Canadians at the same time because all of a sudden we were threatened. Like even people who inherently are not dialed in to care a lot about that stuff, that becomes pretty live and visceral when your biggest trading partner is not only talking about like smashing you with a sledgehammer, but maybe taking you over to boot.
But you know what? I'm doing polling recently, and the whole Trump thing's disappeared in Canada.
That's yes.
It's disappeared. People are not afraid of Trump. 51st state right now. They're not really thinking about the tariffs. They're back to the same old issue set
Yeah.
that they were on before. Cost of living is the number one thing, except Carney's numbers are stratospheric.
So that's
Even though
amazing because he
the
managed to
issue that
like,
he's supposed to be there
yeah,
for is not the
yeah.
issue anymore.
So it's like he managed to ride that wave. And even though the wave has subsided, he's still, I'm torturing the analogy now, but he's perched on like a happy high cliff.
Right.
But
Right.
that I find that so strange. Like I have no doubt like those findings that mirrors exactly like what I feel, what I see projected in other people. But that's a funny thing because the economic damage from the tariffs isn't gone, right? It's like my hometown of the Sioux is cowering right now because of the steel tariffs. It's brutal. So it's a funny thing. I think it's true that the urgency of it for the public has really quelled. Like remember back, even rewind your brain, I think of it in very newsrooms terms, like in March when it was like Tariff Tuesday. It was one of those days where everyone in the newsroom stands around with their arms crossed, looking up at the TVs.
Yeah.
That the facts of those days are still with us. It's just that, an emergency becomes old news after a while.
Yeah. Paul, you did some pretty in-depth studies thinking about the Trudeau government and how it operated. What are the important differences you're noticing in the way the Carney's government operates? I'll just say what I hear from folks. I hear about professionalism. I
Yeah.
hear about meetings that start and end on time. I hear about people that are expected to wear suits and dress shoes to work. I hear about
Have
um,
you heard the brown shoe rumor? We've
I've
all
heard
heard
the
the
brown
brown
shoe
shoe
that has
rumor,
to be
right?
black shoes, not brown shoes,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I've heard all this stuff. I heard there's no Kleenex box in the cabinet room anymore because there's no crying in cabinet anymore. So
Do you know what I
Or if you
love?
cry,
Even if like half of that is apocryphal, the fact that apocryphal things are popping up around this tells us something, right? Even if all of that is horseshit, it's great.
if you cry, it's 'cause he's going to make you cry, and everyone's going to see the puddle of tears gathering on the floor. Uh, I mean, there does seem to be a fair bit of marketing of this. Bob Fife had an astonishing piece in the Globe about he will absolutely fire a motherfucker, and I'm like, I am here to tell you that deputy ministers have gotten fired before, and the anticipation of it was in front page news in the Globe. Um, so like, there's a little bit is I'm telling like a little bit is the romanticization of fairly prosaic things. Like the thing about Carney is he puts on his pants one leg at a time. I'm like, pretty sure that's
So
how they're built to be put
strategic.
on. Um, and yet, like the ratcheting up of the stakes means that there's the ever present possibility that at some point people will start to notice that he hasn't really delivered. Like we were supposed to have one Canadian economy by July 1st. That's next week. And if I can't buy, you know,
BC
British
wine.
Columbia beer in Alberta or Ontario wine in Quebec, uh, people will start to notice that sort of thing. And
You're not going to be able to buy Ontario wine in Quebec ever, and you know that.
well, this is well
They will
then
just refuse to sell it. It won't be the law. It will just be.
this is unfortunately in my genteel old age, all I want is mocktails, and they sell that shit everywhere. But they and then there's the major project list, which seems to have gone through a bit of a like they were going to come out of the first ministers meeting in Saskatchewan with a list of major projects, and then they didn't do that, and then they passed the major project bill, which was C5, through the House, and any day now through the Senate, and then Carney comes out and says, this is the law that allows us to begin to concoct the list of major projects. And I'm starting to think we're getting a bit of a runaround here. And so far, the political cost of that is zero. Someday it will be larger than zero.
Right, right, right. Um, the ramping up of expectations, that was necessary in the election, Shannon, but why do you think they continue to do it? I mean, the standard thing has been to set measurable things, achieve them. That's how you go about this. This is the lesson I learned from Paul Martin. Set 2-year
Yeah.
rolling targets and meet them. And that's how you earn your credibility. Don't promise some pie in the sky thing. Um, but I mean, everything that they do is, it really seems right now, and there's been a lot of international trips, but it all does seem very elevated in its importance.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the kind of over promising or raising of expectations. I find that really puzzling. And I want to be very clear and sort of specific about how I'm saying this. I'm not like attributing internet galaxy brain to Carney, but if we start from the premise that he's a strategic dude, that he's very careful in what he does, which I think so far in the last 4 months or so we've seen, there's a deliberate quality to how they roll things out. I find it interesting because I find there's a sort of a ta-da quality to a Carney announcement. And there was a distinct ta-da quality to a Trudeau announcement, but they were totally different ta-das, right? Like it was just a totally different kind of flourish. But if you start from the idea that he's strategic and careful, then like what the hell are they doing? Promising the sun, moon, and stars by Canada Day, and on top of that, your marshmallows will roast perfectly and will not catch fire this summer. Like what is that? And so then I have to think, and again, I'm not saying this as an infomercial for his brilliance and his ability to deliver, but I have to think then there must be some amount of certainty for them behind the scenes that they are going to be able to deliver. Like we often talk about, a honeymoon, and I was just sort of spitballing in our meeting today like, what do we think is the statute of limitations on the honeymoon? Like, is it September? Will everyone go away and have a summer of kind of normalcy? Well, presumably PMO keeps working away, the legs kind of paddling furiously beneath the water. The Canada Day deadline, as Paul said, there's the 30-day deadline for renegotiating some kind of deal with the US. He has set himself a number of like very specific markers in the sand where the public has given him a lot of credibility right now. They've handed over their belief, their hopes to him. But at some point, like those debts are going to come due. And so I find the overpromising puzzling, except if there's some way behind the scenes that they know they're going to be able to deliver on it. And again, I don't mean to be unduly credulous. I just mean sort of like within the confines of the way they seem to operate, I have to assume they have something they know they're going to be able to flip over on the table. But
Right.
what is it? When is it? And I agree with you that the big announcements so far have been, I think, very different, particularly from the last 10 years, because they've been very externally oriented. They've been very foreign affairs oriented. They've been about turning away from the United States, turning toward Europe. They've been things that are going to pay out over a long period. They've been massive defense spending. Like they're very different sorts of ta-das for a Canadian audience.
So here's what a well-run company does. It provides value to shareholders, sure, but it also takes a good chunk of its profits and plows that money back into its own operation, making sure the company is sound and strategically positioned and technologically equipped to compete and deliver to its customers in the years ahead. And if it keeps on doing that year after year, it acquires a reputation as the class in its field. Our sponsor, CN, is just that, because that is what CN does. This year, CN will be spending about $3.4 billion laying hundreds of kilometers of new track, refurbishing existing track, and building sidings so that prioritized cargo gets to its destination more quickly. In Alberta, where CN employs about 3,500 people and operates about 2,500 miles of routes, the railway is spending $500 million to expand rail capacity and intermodal service in Edmonton. In Ontario, home to around 4,000 CN railroaders, the railway will spend about $600 million, much of that on building the crucial Milton Logistics Hub, which was finally approved a few years ago and will allow CN to better meet the needs generated by the explosive growth of the Greater Toronto Region. And British Columbia, with 2,700 CN workers, will see crucial upgrades to bridges in the interior, the beginning of work on an overpass in the densely populated Vancouver area, and longer sidings along key corridors leading to the vital port of Vancouver. This is all a lot of work, and it's really expensive. But for the first time in our lifetimes, the Prime Minister and the provincial premiers are pulling together to open up our internal supply chains and clear barriers to internal trade. CN's smooth operations are absolutely critical to achieving that, and CN is stepping up. One of the things that's really interesting about some of it to me is somebody that's tried to advise politicians over the years is that so much of this policy agenda is stuff that has been historically thought to be terrible politics.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason that we don't spend any money on defense is not because nobody ever thought it was a good idea substantively to spend money on defense. It's because there's never been any political will to spend any money on defense, right? And historically, the number of Ontarians or Quebecers that you could get excited about building a pipeline, or British Columbians, pretty small, right?
Mhm.
And so these things that we're supposed to be excited about, and seemingly are getting excited about, are things that have historically been really bad politics.
Well, and I mean, anecdotes are the only evidence. I'm starting to hear from progressive friends, like musicians on Facebook and stuff, who were so excited that the demon Poilievre had been defeated, but this defense stuff, this NATO stuff, has gotten them very vexed, you know.
Mhm.
And hey, Prime Minister Carney, why don't you throw $50 billion at downtown Canada, which is in distress right now? And
Right.
you know, and especially in a week when the point of hitting these NATO targets is to give ammunition to, well, I mean, you know, I honestly believe it's in the fight for freedom, but it's also to stay well in a club whose Secretary General just filleted Donald Trump in that text message. In a week when Donald Trump threw kilotons of armament at the side of a mountain in Iran. It's there are a lot of people, including a lot of our colleagues, who have wanted nothing better than this for as long as they've been writing. But there's also a lot of Canadians who get very nervous when that's the territory that Canada gets into.
Right. I mean, what do you think, Shannon? Is he, we used to talk in the campaign on the Curse of Politics about how it was an unusual election that he was being hired to do a job.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like he was being hired to do a very specific job. This Trump thing, this America thing, it needs a specific skill set. That guy over there doesn't have that skill set. You have that skill set. Let's pick you and you go do it. But it does actually feel really difficult for me to believe that this is what Canadians were expecting.
You mean the defense spending and things like that?
The whole thing, the whole
Oh,
flattering of Trump all the time,
yeah.
the seemingly good discussions with Trump, the defense spending. I mean, it doesn't feel elbows up. It feels like deal making. And maybe that is this way to we win. And maybe that's smart. And listen, I'm not second guessing Mark Carney. I think he knows way more about this than I do, but I'm a little shocked as an observer by what I'm
Yeah.
getting. There's some
Yeah.
dissonance with me. Then
Do you guys remember there was like that quick sequence where there was a leak of a news story? And I'm sorry, I honestly can't remember who had the story. It might have been my paper. But there was, I think, one or two outlets that had the leak of the Carney phone call with Trump in which he supposedly called him transformative and said, look, I'm going to land punches on you during the campaign, but like we can be buddies after. And it sounded weaselly, right? It was a terrible look for Mr. Elbows Up, Mike Myers' best friend. And then I think it was just a week or two later that they had the Oval Office meeting. And Carney made a point of calling him transformative in front of the cameras. And there's
it's a
kind
great
of that
word, by the way.
It's amazing. It's an amazing double entendre. Like I wrote last weekend about, things that are transformative, like a beautiful building bedecking your city skyline, or like norovirus at a wedding. Like those are both, they qualify as transformative. You can pick which flavor of that you feel is more relevant.
Yeah.
And Carney kind of has that amazing quality, right? That kind of like smart ass thing. Some people have written about like his winking problem. Like he kind of manages to walk that razor's edge, right? Where he's sitting in the Oval right beside the gorilla in the too long tie. And he winks at the camera or the media to sort of show that he gets the joke. And you just hope that the gorilla doesn't look across the room and lose it.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to your point, that's a fine thing to do now. Like that is a fine line to walk, to flatter Trump enough to cultivate a relationship with him, because we know Trump is so id-driven. He is so, like his policy is driven by the personal to a greater degree than maybe any other politician I can ever remember watching closely. And so it makes sense. It's smart that Carney is sort of trying to play whatever buddy card he's playing behind the scenes. But that is a really, really tough thing to pull off in public. Although, as you were saying, David, if your polling's showing that people are feeling less urgent about the concern with the US, do the elbows come down a bit? Does Carney have more room to maneuver there? Like, does that give him, do Canadians get more forgiving if he has to sort of finesse things a bit instead of punching a guy in the face? I don't know.
Even in normal times, it would have been odd and bad politics to be as flattering to a U.S. president as Carney is being to Trump. If Chrétien had done this to Clinton, if Mulroney had done this to Reagan, if anybody done this to anybody else, Canadians would have been saying, you suck face. That's not the way we do things.
Do you think the weirdness, though, of this president, like, buys you some grace there? Like, does that put an asterisk on
I would have thought it would have accentuated it.
I could see that. Yeah. Sorry, go Paul.
Stephen Harper spent his first couple years in office while George W. Bush was president. After having apologized to the Americans for not joining them in the Iraq War from his opposition job, he made a concerted effort over years to dilute the association in voters' minds between him and George W. Bush. They used to, in their focus groups, they used to have a kind of a tarot card of symbols, a tarot deck of symbols.
Because Bush used to be the symbol of what a bad president looked like,
well,
right?
this is it. And if people would rifle through now we've topped Bush, but people would rifle through the deck and they would find cards that they thought reminded them of Harper. And if the little White House with a Stars and Stripes flag over it was in the hand that they dealt Harper, the Harper people were worried, and they spent years trying to get that card out of the tarot hand, and Bush noticed it. So when he left office, he conspicuously did not call that son of a gun Stephen Harper for a farewell call.
Okay.
And now here's Mr. Elbows Up. Like, well, Lloyd Oxworthy has already written a piece with what happened to the elbows.
Yeah, the honeymoon's over with Lloyd, Shannon. If you're looking for places where the honeymoon has ended with Lloyd Oxworthy, and I presume Alan Rock is also offside now
It's
as well.
coming.
Yeah.
So, and then the question is, does that, like, are they the first two of millions?
Right.
Which, stranger things have happened, although offhand I can't remember.
It takes a
what.
nation of millions to hold Lloyd back.
Yeah.
So, just the last thing on this is about the culture of the government that I find really interesting and unusual. So, when Paul Martin became the prime minister, the people that were in his PMO and the people that were mostly in his cabinet were so familiar to him and his family that if they dropped by for dinner, nobody would have been surprised. Right. And most governments are full of people, both at the staff level and at the cabinet level, that the prime minister knows very, very well and has worked with for years, has been allied with for years, friends with, etc. Carney knows nobody who's working for him. Like, how long has he known Pitfield? A few years? 4 years or something, right? I'm guessing. And he's known Lametti for a long time, but he's never worked with him. I don't think he's ever worked with Marc-Andre Blanchard. I don't think he's ever worked with Michael Sabia. Most of the cabinet didn't know them from a hole in the ground beforehand. This is a very interesting, and I presume has ramifications to it, Paul.
So absolutely, and that's been part of my analytical tool for understanding Carney since he went into politics for real. So 18 minutes ago. And what I hear is people in the PMO say that is changing quickly. But first of all, the characteristic. There are people who spend their entire lives in politics, and grow up mastering the human associations and the rule systems that constitute life in Ottawa, right? Jean Chrétien was the absolute perfect example. And Chrétien could move boldly because he knew the personalities and he knew what you could get away with and what might get you in trouble that no one else would have thought of, right? There's another kind of leader in the world. The journalist Nicholas Lemann refers to them as mandarins. These are people who superbly skilled with portable skill sets who usually went to the best schools like Harvard and Oxford. And the thing about a Mandarin is they get slotted into a complex situation. Someone points them to a desk, says, there's your desk, off you go, which is exactly the life of Mark Carney. It's exactly the life of a central banker. When he arrived in the finance department, he came from Goldman Sachs. He didn't know anyone in finance. When he went to the Bank of England, he almost literally didn't know anyone in England who hadn't been on the Oxford hockey team with him 30 years earlier. And it was no skin off his nose, like he just set to work, and he's been acting like that since he got here. Like, he had that tiny compact first cabinet that got mixed reviews. So he fired half of those people, tripled the size of the thing, and the very strong vibe you got off of him is whatever. Like, apparently I need a cabinet. Fine. They didn't like the first one. Here's a different one, right?
Right.
So I think Carney has Mandarin background and Mandarin instincts. And one thing a Mandarin does is he doesn't ever rethink the workplace that he's in because that's not his damn job. Like, nobody rethinks Harvard. Nobody rethinks Goldman Sachs, What I'm told, though, is he's getting to know these people fast. And for one particular reason, he was in a competitive leadership race. And in modern leadership races, you just give everybody your phone number and invite them to text you. So literally, like 1,000 liberals have his phone number and feel free to text him. And so in that sense, access to Carney is far flatter than it ever was for Justin Trudeau. And so those two things are kind of in tension, those two dynamics.
Right. Retirement. It's something most Canadians dream of. Those dreams differ, however. Some want to travel, others own a cottage or cabin, or a boat. I'll take a moment as you insert your own retirement dream here. But obviously, we also ask ourselves, how much will it cost? For over 20 years, our sponsor, Fidelity Investments Canada, has been leading the national conversation on retirement issues with its retirement report. This year is the special 20th edition, and there are a wealth of key insights. Fidelity surveyed 2,000 Canadians who said that, given cost of living, housing prices, and market uncertainty, 91% of pre-retirees feel that retiring today is more financially challenging than it was 20 years ago. Today's pre-retirees believe they'll need just over $1 million for a comfortable retirement, more than double what they thought they needed in 2005. While that may seem like a faraway dream, Fidelity's retirement report consistently reveals having a written retirement plan significantly enhances preparedness, allowing people to feel more comfortable in a shifting retirement landscape. Curious about how Canadians are preparing for their life in retirement? Download the 2025 retirement report found on fidelity.ca and tune in next week to hear more about how broader financial and political concerns are affecting the outlook on retirement. What do you think, Shannon, about the relationship between him and the people who populate his government, many of which were very, very loyal soldiers of an extraordinarily different government just months ago?
Well, I mean, politics as in sports, winning is great deodorant, right? So there's lots of people who, I mean, look at the people who were ready to walk out the door who then changed their mind. Their kids got less cute. They decided to come back. They didn't want to spend so much time with their families. Like, shit happens when you go from being in the basement to all of a sudden winning. So, I mean, I'm being very glib and crass about it, but people will follow him because things are going well. I think a lot of, like, I keep
Do you think
saying,
it's good or bad that the people in his office are not his friends?
do I think it's good or bad?
Yeah.
Um, I think it's good. I think I have thought that the biggest lesson, like if we're allowed to take life lessons separate from politics,
Right.
a visceral lesson I took from the Trudeau government was do not work with your besties. Don't work in an environment that feels super comfy and cozy and clubby to you. It's the worst thing for you because it means you're surrounding yourself with people who have the same blind spots as you. Like you're all losing your minds in the same direction. You have no, like you could see it from the outside with that crew, that there was no one in the room, like over and over, every scandal, every fuck up they had the same underlying quality to it, which was, how did anyone think this was okay? Like
Right.
what sane person thought this was going to fly? And the answer in essence was kind of that there wasn't a sane person in the room because they all like they talk in aviation safety about like the Swiss cheese problem where you want to have multiple redundant systems of safety, right? You check the wings over and over and over. Different people check the wheels, different people check the wings, because the idea is if you stack up pieces of Swiss cheese, the whole should never run all the way through to the plate or you're screwed.
Right.
But when you work with people who all think like you and they think you're doing God's work and anyone who opposes you is a demon, then like you're stacking up the holes in the Swiss cheese and you're missing massive things. So based on that, I think, very negative example, I would say it's a terrific thing if he's got some more oppositional tension or even just less coziness. I mean, who knows how that'll play out over time? You know, he's a guy with a big brain and a big ego, and that's a pretty big club to swing around the office. So you can get a lot of you can buy yourself a lot of cooperation pretty effortlessly. So maybe you end up with the same thing. But as a sort of starting proposition, as a structural thing, having people around you who are not your best buds, I think is much healthier both for the PMO and for the country too.
Yeah. Paul, I think he's like the loneliest PM in his entourage since Pierre Trudeau, probably.
Except, look, I've never known him that well, and I actually took pains to keep a certain distance from him when he was the bank governor and he was collecting buddies, right? Like when he was running every day with John
You
Ivison.
don't jog, though.
What's that?
You
Yeah,
don't
I don't. Well,
jog.
no, I mean, I was helped by the fact that I had no hope of keeping up. But like the John Ivison, Evan Solomon running thing, you know.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but the impression I have of the guy is not that he's a, a terrifying hammer of fate who will destroy you. Quite the opposite. He's actually easygoing, jokey, with near strangers.
Charming. The word charming comes up all the damn time.
I expect most of the time he's quite pleasant to work with, you know. The question, which I think is unresolved, is it's not just a matter of personality or of chemistry between members of a team, but also of perception and what you bring to the table, and is he able to hire to compensate for whatever his weaknesses are? Like, and again, the case is Harper, who knew that he was well to the right of the Conservative Party that he was forming, and he brought in people like Marjorie Le Breton and Carson and you know, Joe Clark Tories to make sure that he was covered off on that stuff. And
You actually mentioned
knew that
Ben
he didn't
Carson.
have what's that?
You actually mentioned Ben Carson,
Uh,
or
is it-
not Ben? Ben, who's the guy's name?
well, this is it. I'm trying to remember myself.
But it's the APTN guy, isn't it?
Yeah, the guy who got
Yeah.
in big trouble.
Yeah.
Who was a lovely guy
Yeah.
when he wasn't
Ben
in legal
Carson
trouble.
is the surgeon, the Republican brain surgeon. I'm getting all these people confused in my old age now.
Yeah,
Bruce Carson?
Bruce Carson.
Bruce
There you
Carson.
go.
There you go.
There we go.
Thank you,
And
Shannon.
I'm
You're
younger than
saving-
you guys. I
you're
don't even think I
saving
was
the show.
around for his heyday, but I tried.
Yeah.
Harper put Carson in charge of writing the platform for 2004 or six. And what he said to him was, "I know you're to my left, and so I think you should be in charge of this process." And Bruce Carson, now that we remember his name, said,
Yeah.
"Well, you've got that right." You know, is Carney elevating? Like, he may be reinforcing weaknesses because he's not elevating people with a hell of a lot of parliamentary experience, you know? So I wonder whether there's any one of those meetings who could say, look, ramming these massive bills with highly problematic aspects of them through any parliament in the time span that you're discussing is far from being guaranteed. Like, is that voice present at the table, or are the other voices that will tell him something he doesn't know, you know?
Right.
And I think you're
Well, you
going to
have
get
to be
away with
prepared, I
that.
think, to win the argument.
Well, and you're going to get away with that ramming through for a while, probably for long enough to tell yourself that it's fine. That the naysayers, the ones who are dragging their feet, the ones wearing brown shoes to a meeting and showing up late are wrong, because like those chickens won't come home to roost for a while, right? It's just like C5. Like if you're determined to do big things fast, it's going to take a little while before the serious resistance works its way through the system and hits you in the face. And same thing with ramming things through. Like you're not going to immediately have a touch the stove, burn your hand lesson from it that forces you to recalibrate. Like some bad habits can get worn in because early on it seems like you can get away with it, and the people who are like beaking off at you about how you can't are wrong, and they should like can it, right?
All right.
One more
Okay,
thing.
we've only got. You go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
He's making it obvious that he has no intention of doing a root and branch reform of anything, including by bringing Michael Sabia in as clerk of the Privy Council. Now, I'm party to
You're out on a limb here. You're out on a limb here, my friend.
all
You
alone,
are
yeah.
you are like leading the anti-Sabia parade, and there's nobody at the parade.
No, I know. Although
Yeah.
in private, I have a bit more company. But but it doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong about whether it's a good idea. It's a certain kind of idea. You
Yeah.
do not hire Michael Sabia if you want to launch a 20-month reform of the public service. You hire Michael Sabia if you want to punch through the public service like you're
Yes.
like a battering ram through concrete. And the people the overwhelming majority of public service who don't get recruited as helpers in his schemes are going to be ignored or shoved aside, you know. And so that's one
But is that
big.
because he's got a pretty clear sense of what he's actually good at? Like one of the things that resonated with me is when he said 24 Sussex. Maybe somebody has to deal with that, but it's not going to be me that deals with that.
Yeah,
Right? In other words, the country has lots of issues that other people can deal with. I'm here to deal with these issues.
I
But
had
that's the
somebody.
hired for a job thing, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he understands the assignment to some degree.
I was going to tell another anecdote, but you have a question.
No, my question was going to be to change the subject in the last few minutes that we have and talk about Polyev a little bit.
Mm.
And I want to start by asking you, I guess, asking you the big question, which is, should they keep him? And should he be the leader of the Conservative Party in the next election campaign? And I can argue this honestly both ways. I'm genuinely interested in your takes. I can argue it both ways. I mean, on the one side, I end up coming down with the fact that is it ever wise to have a leader who's generally an unpopular person? And I don't know many people who like Pierre Poilievre, and I'm not talking about general Canadians. I'm talking about people who actually know him. So is it wise to have a person who's unpopular as your leader? On the other hand, they got an extraordinary number of votes in a situation that was really not fortuitous for them. And if I was in their shoes, I would be awfully tempted to say, let's run that back and dare the Liberals to get 45% of the vote again. Right? Bet you can't. So what do you think? Shannon, start.
Yeah, I'm going to ride the same fence post you are. I could see both. I could see both sides too. I could see, and here I'm cribbing from what Paul's written, but I firmly believe it. There's a lot of value in giving someone a second run at things. Let people learn, let them refine, let them do things differently. Now, I think that's predicated on what Poilievre's been saying about learning and growing and listening and going away to like walk through a field of wildflowers and have a very deep think since, he got his ass handed to him. Is that real? Is there a recalibration there? Is there humility? Is there listening? Is there adjustment? Because another way to look at the weird circumstances of this election that kind of like so perfectly you wonder if Carney like bought an enchanted coin from like a wizened lady in an obscure pub like 50 years ago that he's had in his pocket since then,
Totally.
is it was also really fortuitous circumstances until it wasn't for the Conservatives. Massive, massive wave of just utter like murderous fatigue with an incumbent government. Poilievre was everything Trudeau wasn't. And so I think he managed to basically supersede his base level. I don't know if it's unlikability or just divisiveness, like that quality of his that makes certain people just curl up their lip when he's on the TV. But he succeeded in sublimating that beneath an idea of like, look, I'm not Trudeau, I'm the anti-Trudeau, let's do this. And so if Carney, like if you walk it out, if Carney has a good few years and delivers on a few things, is there a sense of this isn't a fourth term Liberal government, it's a new thing, it's its own entity? Or I guess you could hope Carney doesn't deliver and there's fatigue and there's a sense of just another Liberal with big promises who can't deliver. But all of that hinges on, does Poilievre learn and grow and adjust? Does he change? Like, is Jenny still the person behind the scenes running things? That engendered a lot of strain and resentment within the ranks. You don't want people down in the grassroots to not want to work for you or help or, knock 10 more doors or do whatever. And there was a lot of hurt feelings and pissed off people. So it all kind of hinges on him, which is unanswerable. And because he's really kind of gone to ground this summer, he's disappeared. Like I think they could call the by-election any day, if I'm not mistaken, and presumably he'll pop up again. But like, what is he doing with that time and how does he respond to it? Because he's not a guy who changes. Like that dude was writing letters to the editor when he was like 16 that were verbatim what he was pitching 25 years later to be prime minister.
He has
So
bragged about the fact that he's not changed his mind on it.
Yeah, which is like a hell of a thing to even think that's, whether it's true or not is immaterial. To think that that's a thing to thump your chest about is its own kind of.
Look at me. I've changed my mind on Wells. People can change their mind over time, right?
Yeah, it's good to be
You'll come to
flexible.
regret it too, David. I think the best case for keeping Poilievre is that the likely candidates to replace him would not be more appealing to people who didn't vote Conservative last time, right? I'm hearing names like Roman Baber, like, and I emphasize likely. Like they're not going to get rid of Poilievre and bring in Jean Charest or
What
Scott
about Melissa
Price.
Landsman?
What's that?
What about Melissa Landsman?
I think there's a room for a healthy debate about how likely she would be to want the gig.
Fair.
And
I just
and
could see
and
her appealing more broadly into a different constituency than he did. Certainly not Baber.
and it'd be an interesting question. There used to be a special class of politicians who were
Baber'd be
considered to be.
insane. Let's just
What's
stop.
that?
Baber'd be insane. Baber would have to create another party. Like that would have to result in another party being formed.
Yeah, but again, like there used there was a bunch of conservative MPs who were seen as natural rising stars in cabinet, and the
Yeah.
answer was the reason was that they were at highs every night drinking with the gallery, right? Like in the real world of today's Conservative Party, which is everyone in Canada who doesn't like Mark Carney,
Yeah.
I think Pierre Poilievre quitting tomorrow would likely result in the party moving further to the right, and alienating itself from gettable voters even further. Um, Poilievre has made like all of two concessions to the results of the last election, right? He's dressing in a more conventionally prime ministerial fashion, and he is being less of a wall-to-wall jerk to the press gallery. And that's about it. Like everything else, his interview he gave to the Hub was fascinating. He said basically, I did everything right. Now I just have to do it again after Carney is unpopular.
Well, even
And
his concession wasn't really a concession. It was a save the date. It was this is part one of two. We'll get him next time. Like it was a remarkable sort of rhetorical feat, I thought.
Yeah. Well, he was
yeah,
positioning for the leadership immediately. And part of it is that it wasn't a real loss. It wasn't a fair contest in a sense.
Exactly.
Right. And surely we would have won a fair contest. Look at how we did in an unfair contest. I don't mean to make that sound as Trumpy as it sounds, but that's actually the argument as they as they make it. Um, but I think that they have to look at something and say, right now, voting intention's pretty close between the two parties, but best prime minister is not, right?
Mhm.
And
yeah.
Shannon, I'd be interested in your take on this, which is, I mean, somebody said to me last night that Carney represents the classic male boomer's ideal of leadership. Um,
I
and
don't know
as
about that.
the person on this panel who's not a classic male boomer, um,
I am zero
may,
of those things.
yeah,
Zero boxes ticked.
maybe you could talk to us a little bit about like what is it about the difference between Carney and Poilievre that even conservative voters are reacting to and saying Carney looks more like a prime minister to me.
Oh boy, that's huge. I think it is the projection, the performance of competence. And by saying that, I don't mean that it's inherently hollow competence. I mean, we're in proof is in the pudding mode, right? Like, let's see what he can deliver on. But it is that ostentatious projection of I am here to do a job. I'm a pragmatist. I'm gonna show up. I'm gonna speak in a measured tone. Um, and when you juxtapose that, especially in a moment of crisis, which is, as we discussed, which is what things felt like a few months ago and don't necessarily feel like right now, whatever is the underlying reality, you had Poilievre who showed up as like the human incarnation, as like one of those Viking helmets with the horns every damn day. And that was immensely satisfying to the electorate. That was where people were when that Trudeau guy would not take a hike and go. And then when everything looked, I hate using the word existential over and over because it's so cliche that it becomes flat, but like for real, I don't know about you guys. Like I have never had a feeling in the pit of my stomach about big things on behalf of my country like I did from like January through March. Like that was a reaction
Yeah.
I have never felt in myself before. Since then it lingers in a different way. I finally I got a coveted +1 invitation to the July 4th party at the US ambassadors, which is usually the coolest ticket in town. And I said, no thanks. And I will not, like, zero interest, did not even pause to think about it. So that stuff all still lives in us.
Yeah.
But then you have Carney showing up with this immensely sort of smooth, again, I'm saying performance because I think there's a very deliberate projection there, but I'm not meaning to suggest that it's not real. It might be, but is the adult in the room thing. And I think you can see that where the leadership numbers diverge from the party numbers. it's one leader is pulling their party up, one is pulling it down. And I haven't seen a lot from him yet that I've thought, ooh, that's denting that. Like that's going to hurt whatever it is people are attaching to him. And as we've, I think, been circling around in different ways here, some of it is magical thinking. People have credited him with an awful lot of wonderful stuff. Like, remember the lady who screamed in the rally, like, lead me, Big Daddy? Like,
Yeah.
it's that kind of energy that's been attached to him. But, and that's going to run out eventually, but I don't think it has yet. Like, I don't think he's hit the wall of that yet. Um, and now will come time to deliver on it. You know, you've given us very lofty deadlines. You've said no less than you were going to remodel the Canadian economy in a moment of wartime crisis. I would not have assigned myself that to-do list in public where people could see it, but I don't know what he's doing with that, but he must have some sort of plan for how that is not going to come back and bite him in the face.
Paul, I think you could make an argument that stylistically and tone and presentation, a whole bunch of ways, that Carney is a bigger change from Trudeau than Poilievre would have been. That Poilievre and Trudeau have more in common than Trudeau and Carney have in
100%.
common, in the way that they present themselves. And um, you have obviously been following Poilievre his entire life in politics, and from a more neutral standpoint than I have been. So, does he have other facets to his personality, or is this? I'm inclined to believe that this stage in life, what we see is what we get. But
Yeah.
can he run as somebody else?
The great thing about politics is that it will absolutely, if you're lucky enough to last at all in a top job in politics, it will absolutely exhaust your stock of prepared material. And then the question is, now what do you got, right? Jean Chrétien nearly lost a Quebec secession referendum, and everyone could see what that did to him. And then the question was, now what do you got, right? Um,
Right.
I I believe that I have believed since for almost 20 years that Pierre Poilievre is a rare political talent, but I also believe that I seriously overestimated his ability to adjust to changing circumstances. And now, if he can't, he's done, and he'll be done before he's 45. And the amount of change, the amount of internal change, the amount of looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I did not have what it took, and I need to find what it took, what it takes next time. If he can't do that, he's done. And one of the things that fascinates me is that for the last year or so, he set up a sort of a proposition, a testable proposition, which was common sense. He kept calling everyone he liked common sense. He kept saying that what Canada needs is common sense. And then more voters looked at the alternatives and decided that common sense looked a lot more like Mark Carney than it looked like Pierre Poilievre.
Mm.
And can he take common sense back from Mark Carney? That's, to me, the interesting question.
Right. Right. That is very interesting. Shannon, what was going on in his brain when he was lecturing Laura Stone about his crowd size?
Oh boy, that was so
Like
strange.
honestly, I'm not trying to be flip. Like
No, no, no.
anybody's antenna, like he should have not done that. Like he should have known that was wrong from the second he started it. Should have been trying to get out of it from the second he was into
Yeah.
it. Like what was wrong with him that he thought that was the thing to do in this anti-Trump election?
The only thing I can think of, because it was so wrong, it was so weird, like it was just ugh, was that he actually was in real time in public, like working out some insecurities or some shitty feelings. And it was like, because there was this disconnect, right? We were looking at Carney and the Liberals improbably kind of running away with this election, because we have to remember, like, within the contours of the campaign in the middle, they were looking like they were firmly in majority territory. And then things kind of petered out. They sort of lost the assignment toward the end. Like, if that election had been 1 week longer, I'm not sure the outcome would have been the same, the campaign.
Agreed.
And so I
Agreed.
think that happened, if I'm right, around the midpoint when things were sort of ugliest. And when he must have felt like he was standing on a cliff and the ground just crumbled away beneath him, right? Like I can remember having arguments with our desk, with our editors, maybe 6 or 8 months ago when I wrote something in a column, just in a kind of passing way, you know, Poilievre, who will be the next prime minister. And a copy editor very sensibly said, you know, we need to hedge on this. We don't know if that's going to be true. And I said, oh, come on, like, look at the polls. Of course it's going to be true. And it wasn't, and it should have been. And so I can only think about the shock, the rage, the incredulousness that must have accompanied finding himself standing in the middle of that landscape. And the only thing I can make sense of, because that interaction with Laura was so weird and unseemly, and he is in his own way very strategic. Like he operates on it in a much different way than Carney. Like kind of Carney runs cold, Poilievre runs hot is sort of how I would describe it. But he is strategic. Like he doesn't necessarily always calibrate his reactions in ways that I think are advantageous to him with the public, but he's always conscious of what he's doing. And so all I can think of there was that he was clinging to a security blanket of, well, the polls look terrible and people think we've lost this. And that is shocking given how things were. But I'm still packing these arenas. I mean, remember those scenes, the images from Calgary, the people lined up around the buildings? Like there really was a visceral disconnect between the kind of quantitative and qualitative of the campaign, and he was living inside it. So all I can think of is, I mean, we all do and say weird, dumb shit that sounds more okay coming out of our mouth. Like it sounds more okay in the inside voice, the way we hear our voices in our own skulls, than the way you hear them on a recording. And I can only attribute that to like a very human weirdness. Whether that's right or wrong, that's all I can do to make sense of it.
No, I have to agree with you because, I mean, he has too much political skill to make that mistake unless he just really wasn't in his right mind about it. But that is an illustration. I mean, they surely felt the way you are describing. They surely felt robbed, right?
Yes.
In the way, Paul, that I
Yes.
felt robbed in 2006, right? Right? Zachary Daly. Like, that's not supposed to happen in a fucking election campaign, right? You don't plan for that. So there's a special feeling when you think that you should have won, and I think that's how they feel. But that's that probably is a danger zone for them too, because it will lead them to think that if they just run the same campaign again, and I don't think that's true. Yeah. Paul, any last words?
Um, hey, what a fun year. I came out of this election more burned out than I have been in a while. And I'm only just now
Same.
getting into a headspace where I can begin to think about doing serious work, you know. Um,
Right.
First time in Montreal, I'm going to write about the jazz festival and then I'm going to do serious work, but whatever.
Oh,
That
fuck.
sounds like a good way to
You mean your
recharge.
Substack's going to have jazz in it for the next 2 weeks? I'll be looking for something I can read. I love a new Paul Wells piece, but not when it's about fucking jazz. Right?
One jazz piece and then
Right?
I'll behave.
You're not writing about jazz, are you, Shannon? I'll be able to read your stuff.
I'm not. I'm actually about to go on vacation next week. So, and I share Paul's burnout. Like I
Yeah.
kind of backdate my burnout. Like it's not just since January or since Freeland walked out the door. Like I covered the US election through the summer and fall. It just feels to me like for those of us who are really steeped in this stuff, we've been at 9 out of 10 for a full calendar year, which I don't think you're really meant
Well,
to
because
run
we didn't
that
even
fast
get
for
into
that.
the big thing, did we, Shannon? Which is, has there been a day that you don't think about Donald Trump?
Do you know what's
Is
so
there a
funny?
day? There's
Yeah.
never a day for me. And that's so fucked up.
But you remember there was, because I can remember tweeting during Trump won. It might have been the third year or something when I just was done. I can remember tweeting, it seems impossible now, but there will come a day when you won't hear his name, hear his voice, you won't even think about him. And it was sort of a hopeful thing. Like I was pinning that to the wall as I like put another like charcoal mark in the Donald Trump prison in which I lived. But then it happened remarkably fast after the 2020 election. That's what I remember is being sort of shocked that like 4 months later, there were weeks where he was just this irrelevant old man who was on a golf course, doing his thing. And and then he came back and like here we are, right? The cat came back. But there will be a moment again, except then who's going to replace him? Like who's going to grab that lightning in a bottle? Because it's not going away.
But I mean, he's so present. Even I don't like politics enough to pay this much attention to somebody.
No, it's like
Right?
John Mulaney, I think, had the best slogan ever. He said the slogan for Biden in 2020 was, look, at least you can take your eyes off him for 5 minutes. Like just you could look away and no bad shit's gonna happen in 5 minutes. I could really go for that right about now.
But instead, there's a horse in the hospital.
Horse in the hospital. And he's heading for the baby incubators. It's going to be bad, man.
Thank you both so much for your time today. What a great conversation. Have a great vacation, both of you, because I consider the Jazz Festival a vacation for you, Paul, even if you are writing.
Both, yeah.
Yes. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And in fairness, it's a massive thing in Montreal. Big summer festival in Montreal, the Jazz Festival. So have a good time and have a great vacation, Shannon, and keep writing stuff, and we'll keep promoting it on the Curse of Politics. Thank you both for your time.
It was great to be here.
I need to thank our sponsors, TELUS, CN, and Fidelity Investments Canada, and all of you Herle Burly-ites who watched or listened. We'll be back next week with more of this. In the meantime, take care of yourselves.